Hey, what's up, y'all? My name is Devontae, and I sacrificed my time so you don't have to. I got a very interesting excerpt for you guys to hear coming from Dave Meltzer. I know, Devontae, Dave Meltzer, chill. I'm not citing him for any news. This is basically his rhetoric stemming off of the Wrestling Observer Radio. I'll leave a link down in the description box below and just follow along. So check it out. Meltzer on MVP's AEW debut and potentially Lashley and Shelton Benjamin. And I quote, "If there's people you're going to bring in, I really think you want to bring in younger people. They're already too old as far as like an overall roster. There's too many older wrestlers and they're good. It's not like they're not carrying their weight. I just think that you want a certain product mix, especially now because their viewership, because they're running older, they've lost the younger viewership. That younger viewership probably will best relate to younger talent. Not necessarily guys that are better, smarter workers, because these guys are. I know they have some young guys they put on the TV like Nick Wayne and others, but it just feels like too many guys in that age group, and MVP is just another one. And there's probably too many ex-WWE guys as well, and we've got probably 3 more coming. Shelton is not a young guy, and Bobby is not a young guy anymore, even though he looks great." That's very interesting that he brings up this point, because on one hand, I horribly disagree with Dave Meltzer's assessment in regards to what the younger audience likes. Not to mention, I don't like the division between younger audience and older audience. But at the same time, he did say something that was pretty right on the money at that last part. So let's be a little bit charitable here, and we'll talk about the things that I agree with Dave Meltzer on for a goddamn shame. Change. There we go. Fuck. Towards the end of the article, or towards the end of the excerpt, he notates that AEW bringing in people like MVP, Shelton Benjamin, and Bobby Lashley, yeah, for the most part, it's just more ex-WWE talent. And I absolutely agree with that assessment. Yeah, and it's as if we haven't notated this before as far as being a problem with AEW. Yes, they bring in way too many, and not even just WWE talent, now almost exclusively, but it's not as if they don't do the same thing with New Japan Pro Wrestling. It's not as if they don't do the same thing with AAA. Hell, even with their own brand and ROH constantly have to bring them up to this roster right here, and you're kind of devaluing your own roster. For an example, I mean, Mark Briscoe, he's still the ROH World Champion, right? It doesn't feel that way when he's on AEW. I mean, Mark Briscoe, how many times does he win a match? I mean, for God's sakes, he feels like a third-tier champion when he's the world champion of your other brand. It just doesn't make any sense. Constantly having to bring wrestlers up from a different promotion just to get a cheap pop in the ratings is not going to do anything for you in the long run. All it does it does multiple things. I guess the number one thing is you won't get a return on that investment if you keep doing it over and over again. For an example, I'm not a big Mercedes Moné fan. Remember, the overall rating for Mercedes Moné, I think, was like barely 800,000 for the viewership number, if I remember correctly. All in all, you would think with someone of her name value coming from WWE, you should have at least pulled in like at least 900,000. And you may say to yourself, 800,000, 900,000, that's 100,000. That's 100,000 gap, my dude. That's 100,000 gap. I've never gotten 100,000 views in my entire life on YouTube. That's a big fucking number. And you would think that with someone like Mercedes, she could have pulled in that number. There have been other talents who were lesser than her who pulled in bigger numbers because it was still kind of a thing to bring in WWE talent to AEW. It felt new, it felt vibrant to do something like that. And you've overdone it so much that even a talent like Mercedes and her name value, whether I like it or not, objectively, she does have a name. Especially, one will argue she has more of a name than probably, I would argue, maybe 80% of talent you brought from WWE. Being objective here, can't be biased, she does. And the fact that she didn't get the number that you would have thought she would have got versus other talent, like, I guarantee you, if you go look at Paige's numbers the following week, I guarantee you AEW brought in more numbers with Paige than Sasha Banks. It's not because Paige is necessarily a bigger talent than Sasha Banks. It's because, like, what you were doing was a bit of a commodity act, and now that you've done it so many times, it doesn't have the staying power like it used to. That's what happens when you kind of just run the gamut all the time with the ex-WWE talent. You know what I mean? And not to mention, whenever you bring them in, it's kind of a running gag at this point now, where it's like you bring them in, especially at the lower mid-card talent or even the upper mid-card talent to a lesser degree. Honestly, when you think about lower mid-card talent, the only ones they ever did anything with was Toni Storm and Swerve Strickland. And credit where credit is due. They made Toni Storm one of the most popular women in wrestling today. Credit where credit is due. Swerve Strickland, they made him one of the more popular main eventers in professional wrestling today. Not the, but certainly you can argue maybe top 10 of like the most fun, most engaging main eventers in all of professional wrestling. Maybe top 20. But my point being is that they did a good job with those two. But for every Swerve Strickland you bring in, okay, there's a Keith Lee, right? For every Mercedes Moné you bring in, or a Toni Storm you bring in, there's a Saraya. There's an Ember Moon, for an example, right? It wears really, really quick when you do things like that over and over and over again. And just to bring in the Hurt Business, I talked about this last night in regards to my concern with bringing them in. I don't know if you're going to actually keep up with them. I feel like you'll probably do right by them going up to like the first pay-per-view they're going to be introduced at, which I will presume this to be maybe Full Gear. But it's like, without AEW books, again, there's not a lot of substance in regards to the character dynamics of what they want to get across, right? Like, they may do it occasionally, like they try to do it with Sasha Banks, but then they overdo it. You know what I mean? Like, they'll bring in Sasha Banks, for an example, and yeah, I appreciate you not just throwing her out there all willy-nilly to have a fucking match, but at the same time, there has to be substance behind what you're doing. And the set time that you're going to have her wrestle her first match, it has to be relevant. And, you know, that you just can't, for an example, have her build up her character for so long and then she has her first match like fucking 2 or 3 months after her debut. You know, there's levels to this. On one hand, you don't want to just debut her the following week. You theoretically want to have her at the next pay-per-view, right? Theoretically. Or hell, even at a big special show. But at the same time, you don't want to hold them off for 3 months. Especially when it's a WWE talent that's highly anticipated that you want to see wrestle. And I get it, with Sasha it might be a little bit different. Maybe there might be an injury involved here and there, but then you just don't debut her in February. Just because it happens to be in Boston doesn't mean you have to bring her in on that date. If anything, you could have just probably written a vignette, pretty much countdown to her coming, and the Boston area. That's what I would have done theoretically if you really wanted her appearance on that show without theoretically having to reveal her on the show. But they do this all the time, and it's definitely concerning. I agree with Dave Meltzer on that point. That's very, very concerning when having to deal with people like, you know, the Hurt Business and whether or not they're going to be good in the company. You know, I seen somebody comment this last night, I think on the AEW review, who says something along the lines of, oh, well, it's not really AEW's fault. WWE couldn't even do anything with the Hurt Business. I mean, you kind of defeat your own point by saying something like that. Yeah, it's going to be AEW's fault, just like it's WWE's fault for not doing anything with the Hurt Business. You have to give them something to sink their teeth into, and whether or not that thing that you give them works out, that all depends on what they do based off the story that you give them. If you give them a good enough story where you say to yourself, the premise seems kind of like, okay, well, yeah, this seems like a really cool storyline. And then they go out there and the promos end up being dry. The matches end up being super whack. You're trying to understand what was the reason as to why they did this or that in relation to the story in itself. Then you can blame the performers. But when you give them nothing to work with, or in the case of WWE, you break them up prematurely when they were actually killing it, whose fault is that in the end of the day? Of course it's the promotion's fault. And that was with WWE. Now, I'm gonna be level-headed and I'll be willing to see what they're gonna do with the Hurt Business against my own better judgment, because we know how this usually works out. But at the same time though, let's not pretend as if the promotions in themselves don't undercut the wrestlers. We see this all the fucking time. And we especially see it with the WWE talent in AEW. To sit here and pretend as if this isn't a thing that doesn't go on, you're being naive for the sake of being naive. Right? Come on. But on the flip side though, I agree with Dave Meltzer on that point right there. But there's other criticism in regards to the age. Highly disagree with that point. Highly disagree with that point. I made a video about this a couple of years ago talking about age means nothing in the grand scheme of things. I see people have this argument all the time about, oh, well, for an example, Goldberg. I've seen so many people saying, whoa, shit, man, guys should go over Goldberg because Goldberg is 50-something years old and this guy is 20-something years old. That's horrible logic. I don't give a fuck how old a talent is. Are you good? Do you entertain me? That's all that matters in the end of the day. It depends on what position you put the talent in. The age means absolutely nothing. Not to say that it isn't a priority, because you do want to go out of your way to put the young talent into a position where you would think theoretically, eventually, they can entertain you no different than the older talent. And yeah, it's not to say that the older talent shouldn't have a priority to put over the younger talent, but the younger talent still has to be ready. If the older talent is putting over the younger talent just for the simple fact that the younger talent happens to be young, that's dumb logic. Why would you do that for? That's so stupid. Like, your priorities aren't in check. You're doing something for the sake of doing something. Like I said with Goldberg, you know, with the Goldberg stuff and people complaining about him and not putting over younger talent and shit like that, yada, 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 this, taking spots from younger talents. Look, in the end of the day, at least at that time, Goldberg was super over still. He still have staying power compared to what the younger talent were doing at the time in WWE in the early 2020s and the late 2010s. It's not even comparable. At least looking at the aura of what Goldberg brought to the table versus what the younger talent at that time brought to the table. And mind you, this is not me deliberately saying it's the young talent's fault. At that time, WWE was outright unwatchable in 2018 and 2019. So of course, you're going to bring Goldberg in to do his thing. We at least have the nostalgia of at least looking at what Goldberg has done in the past to think to ourselves, okay, if we can just do this and he does this and he does this, that doesn't even necessitate a story to have to be built. We just know his trademarks and we actually, you know, are nostalgic about the trademarks. If he can do these couple of things that he did in the past that got me intrigued in him to begin with, a story is not really necessitated, right? Whereas with these young talents, they have nothing to hold on to. They have no trademarks. They have no promo ability. They have nothing going for them. Essentially just the wrestling in itself. And if they're gonna go out there and if they're just gonna kickflip the entire fucking time, well, guess what? I can see that guy over there kickflip. And I can see that guy over there kickflip. And I can see that guy over there kickflip. And that guy over there. 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 And it doesn't even matter about the age limit anymore. You got guys like fucking AJ Styles who's pushing 50 years old who could still do springboard 450s. It doesn't matter anymore. You still got guys like AJ Styles who is going out there with Cody Rhodes, who's about to be 40 years old, putting on 5-star classes like they did earlier this year. It doesn't matter at all about the age. The age is such a fucking cop-out, bro. It's such a lame excuse. Again, let me reiterate this point one more time. It's not to say that the younger talent should not be prioritized. What I am saying, though, is if the younger talent you have not built up correctly, you have not put them in the correct position in order to go out there and entertain me, then I don't give a fuck what age they happen to be at that moment in time. If they bore me, they bore me. Age ain't supposed to decide what fucking makes me excited or what bores me. It's based off of your skill. It's based off of what you bring to the table. MVP right now has got to be pushing 50 years old, if not already 50 years old. And I can tell you right now, him, Paul Heyman, for an example, those guys can go out there and cut a promo off the top of their dome and keep me engaged with whatever they're saying at that moment. You give them a client, you give them a wrestler to fuck with, I'm always going to be engaged with what they're saying. Ain't got to be no 450s involved, ain't got to be no thumbtacks involved, ain't got to be no tables, ain't got to be no cage, ain't got to be no gimmick, none of that shit at all. It's just them running their mouth on behalf of a talent. Doing something that simple from a fundamental standpoint is all you really need. And guess what? Their skill set has provided them, no matter what the age happens to be at, to be doing more than what the average talent who can go out there and do 450 splashes can accomplish in one given segment. Make that make sense. I would much rather see Paul Heyman talking on behalf of the Bloodline any day of the week versus having to go fucking sit through some stupid lame-ass New Japan Pro Wrestling match in the mid-card of AEW Dynamite, going 2 fucking segments for 20 minutes, getting none but fucking false finishes. You know why? Because the segment before that did that. The segment after that will do that. There is nothing differentiating itself. Alright, like I say all the fucking time when having to compare it to video games because it's the best thing to compare it to because that's the kind of era that we live in currently at the moment. I don't need to be playing exhibition mode on every given fucking hour, every given fucking time. I kind of do want to jump on storyline mode. I kind of do want to jump on season mode. I kind of do want to do a campaign because I kind of do want to see what the story that's going to be playing out right there is going to differentiate itself to give it more purpose as to why I'm doing the exhibition stuff. Now I'm doing the exhibition stuff in the midst of seeing storylines that's going to give me priority and purpose to want to continue doing it versus just doing it just to keep my attention on the television, which is all that's gonna happen when you do exhibition mode. It's not to say that exhibition mode is not a necessity. It's not to say that you don't want to just pull up a chair and just play a video game for like a good 30 minutes. But it is to say if you want to keep it self-sustainable, that you want to have something at least to give it purpose in order to do the match in itself. Does that make any sense to anybody? Huh? Same thing can be said about the wrestling matches. It's not to say that every single fucking match has to have story attached to it, but I will say that every single fucking match has to have purpose, it has to have meaning, it has to have reasoning. If you're gonna bring in a new guy, for an example, to go on the WWE roster just to have a random fucking match, well, I will hope at the very least the guy having the random fucking match, it's not strictly about the wrestling in itself, but it's more so the purpose is to get him over, right? Because I would think in the end of the day, him doing all these exhibition matches as a new talent in order to get him over is to eventually get him on the pay-per-view to do something a little bit more spectacular. That's what I mean. Not everything has to have a story, but everything does have to have a purpose. And I kind of feel like with AEW, and to a lesser degree, even WWE minus NXT, they don't do that correctly in professional wrestling nowadays. And that's what I mean by Dave Meltzer having to use things like age to be a cop-out. It's all a cop-out in the end of the day. Age means jack shit. I understand the reference in regards to WWE having to go up, or WWE talent constantly having to infiltrate the AEW roster, and then they do nothing, and in reality, they just take more spots from other talents who they themselves aren't really doing anything for the most part, but you're so hell-bent on featuring all these other talents from AAA and New Japan Pro Wrestling to go out there to do kickflips and stuff like that, when you could be relying on your main roster in order to get you over. And by that main roster, I mean people you bring from WWE also. Yeah, I get it. I completely understand. But the whole age thing, nah. It's a cop-out. Completely disagree. Nah. And at the end of the day, like I said, MVP coming up with the Hurt Business, if used correctly, if what I believe the potential that can come out of the Hurt Business being on AEW could actually do for that company, then I'm all in for it. Doesn't matter the age, doesn't matter all this shit. I'm all in for it. If Bobby Lashley is going there and MVP is going to be his manager and they're going to feud with Swerve Strickland, I see the potential. The potential is absolutely there. Afterwards, if they're going to do something along the lines of a little bit more political relevant stuff, whether I disagree or agree means nothing, but it keeps me intrigued to see what they're going to do. Now, if you bring them in and they flounder, that has nothing to do with age. That's a straw man. That's an absolute fucking straw man. You're arguing a point that no one is arguing in order to deflect from the actual main concern. No, that's bullshit. The 40-year argument just so happens to conveniently be on these guys who, now they're dead in the water? Now they're fucking floating in the sea? No, they're dead and they're floating in the sea because you didn't give them anything to attach their teeth onto. The same thing can be said about your other talent, and guess what? They're 20-something years old. You can't sit here and tell me what the fuck Private Party is doing at the moment that happens to be fun. Can you? Huh? What the fuck is Nick Wayne doing right now, huh? He's in the stable with Christian, but I haven't seen Christian stable in full in almost a month now. There's only so much you can blame on age before you sit back and then you say to yourself, maybe it can be the actual characters that bore the ever-loving shit out of me. Voila! Am I right? But let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below in regards to Dave Meltzer's comments. Again, being charitable, there's good and there's bad. Typically with Dave, it goes on a one-way street. Typically just bad, but he brought up a few points that I thought was interesting, and it's only best to kind of relate it back to you guys, and you tell me what you feel, I said about the comments and what I gave in regards to the conversation. Didn't really joke around too much in this because I thought this was something that was actually somewhat intriguing as far as having to engage with the content in itself. But I talked about this long enough. I'm gonna let you guys talk about it alongside me. So with that being said, my name is Devontae, and have that in the comment section. A deuces and a P eyes.